That's interesting, Officer Kirkland said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. A lawyer, huh? Maybe you could afford to have a little more respect for the law then. Malik's patience was being tested. He'd been here too many times before, stopped for no reason other than the color of his skin. It was always the same, police officers pretending to follow procedure while subtly asserting their dominance. He kept his posture relaxed, his tone even, despite the knot forming in his stomach. Officer, I've already provided my ID, and I've explained where I'm coming from. Now, if there's nothing else… Before Malik could finish, Kirkland interrupted, his eyes now scanning Malik from head to toe. Do you think you're above us just because you wear a suit? Just because you're a lawyer? He sneered, stepping closer to Malik. You think you can just walk around here, act like you own the place? Malik's mind raced, but he kept his composure, knowing full well how easily situations could escalate. His eyes shifted toward Mendoza, who hadn't said much but was still standing in a way that suggested he was ready for something to go wrong. I'm not here to argue, Malik said, his voice steady. I'm simply trying to go about my day. Kirkland's face twisted into a hard frown. We've had a lot of incidents around here recently, he said, almost as if it were an accusation. A lot of people we don't recognize. And you don't exactly fit in. Malik felt his chest tighten. He knew the drill. This was about race, not reason. This was about a man in a suit not fitting the profile they expected. He could feel the eyes of the neighborhood on him, the murmur of passers-by, but he refused to let the situation get to him. He had been through this before. He was too aware of how these interactions played out, how they could escalate in a second, and how much damage could be done. Malik, the other officer, Mendoza, finally spoke, his voice softening slightly. He had been silent for most of the exchange, watching. I didn't know it was you. Kirkland shot him a sharp look, his jaw tightening. What do you mean, you didn't know it was him? Mendoza's face reddened, but he shrugged slightly, the tension in the air still palpable. I've seen him around, Mendoza said quietly, almost as if he were offering an explanation, or maybe an apology, though it was too little, too late. Malik glanced at the officers, sensing a shift. It was clear they hadn't expected him to be someone they actually knew. It was always a shock when they realized the man they were harassing wasn't just another random black man. Malik could feel the moment hanging between them like a fragile thread, waiting to snap. Kirkland didn't know how to react. For a second, he simply stood there, processing. But Malik wasn't about to let him drag this out any further. You think I'm a threat because I look different, don't you? Malik said, his words sharp now. But I've been a part of this neighborhood longer than you've been a cop, and just because I don't fit your expectations doesn't give you the right to treat me like this. There was a long pause, the streets of Harlem still alive around them, but the moment felt suspended in time. The officers exchanged glances, but neither said anything more. The realization finally started to sink in for Officer Kirkland. Malik wasn't just another person to push around. And as he handed Malik back his ID, there was a fleeting moment where the anger in his expression shifted, almost imperceptibly. You're free to go, Kirkland muttered, his voice tight, but not without a trace of humiliation. Malik didn't respond. He simply took his ID and turned to walk away, the city's hum once again filling the space. As he walked, his mind raced with the knowledge that this wasn't over, not for him, not for the community. But as he reached his car, he couldn't help but wonder, even as he adjusted his cufflinks with ease, if today was a day of real change, just one small shift in a much larger, much deeper battle. Malik sat there in silence, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His suit, once crisp and immaculate, now felt like a reminder of everything he had worked for, the life he had built, the respect he had earned. And yet here he was, in a holding cell, stripped of all that. His mind raced, replaying the moments leading up to this. He could still feel the sharpness of Officer Kirkland's grip, the pain in his arm as it was twisted behind his back, the frustration of being accused of resisting arrest when all he had done was try to stay calm, try to explain himself, the humiliation of being dragged through the streets, watched by a crowd, but knowing that this footage, this truth, might not be enough. He thought about the woman recording on her phone. Would her video make a difference? Would anyone believe the truth, or would this just be another incident swept under the rug? The uncertainty gnawed at him. After what felt like an eternity, the door to the holding cell opened. The officer who had taken his information earlier stood in the doorway, his eyes flicking over Malik before glancing at his screen again. Malik Edwards, he muttered, like he was trying to make sense of the name, his gaze now more curious than accusatory. Any relation to the Malik Edwards who... But the officer didn't finish the sentence. Malik knew exactly what he was asking, and for a moment he thought maybe the officer had started to recognize him for who he really was. A lawyer, a man of the law. But no matter how much the officer's face softened, Malik knew this wasn't about his identity. Not yet, at least. "What's the charge, officer?" Malik asked, his voice steady despite the tension still hanging in the air. The officer hesitated for a moment, the words caught in his throat before finally answering. Resisting arrest, but he trailed off, his confusion evident. "We're still looking into it." Malik didn't respond right away. He simply nodded, as if this was any other routine. But in his mind, a different battle was already brewing. He knew how this would go, how they would try to twist the narrative, how his name would become just another statistic in a broken system. The officer's uncertainty meant little to Malik. He knew what had happened to him wasn't just about the moment, about a simple misunderstanding. It was about the deeper problem, one that had been ingrained in the system for far too long. As he was left alone in the cell once again, Malik felt his resolve harden. This wasn't over, and he wasn't going to let it slide. He would fight, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been in his shoes. The road ahead would be long and uncertain, but this was just the beginning. The story wasn't finished yet, and he would make sure the world saw it, became a symbol of the deeper issues plaguing the system. As the story spread, Malik's case was no longer just about one man wrongfully arrested. It became a rallying cry for all those who had suffered at the hands of biased policing and systemic injustice. The media pounced on the story, and soon Malik was at the center of a national conversation. News outlets covered every angle, from the public outcry to the ongoing investigation into Officer Kirkland's actions. The footage of Malik's arrest, recorded by the young woman across the street, went viral, sparking even more outrage. It was undeniable now that what had happened to him was wrong. The narrative was shifting, and people were listening. Malik's phone rang constantly with calls from reporters, attorneys, and community leaders offering their support. But amid the whirlwind of attention, Malik kept his focus on one thing, making sure this wasn't just another story that would fade away with time. He knew that the attention was fleeting unless something real came out of it. His first step was to file a lawsuit against the department, citing the wrongful arrest, the use of excessive force, and the violation of his rights. He was determined to hold the officers involved accountable, not just Kirkland, but anyone who had stood by and allowed this to happen. But it wasn't just about the legal battle. Malik wanted to ensure that the community's voice was heard. He held meetings with civil rights groups, spoke with other victims of police brutality, and worked with local organizers to bring attention to the broader issue of police misconduct. This case, he knew, could be the tipping point for larger change. Back at the precinct, Officer Kirkland was under intense scrutiny. The department had launched an internal investigation, though Malik didn't hold much hope for a fair outcome. He knew how easily these things could be swept under the rug. However, Kirkland's initial smirk had faded completely, replaced by nervous tension. He was no longer the officer in control. He was now just another cog in the machine of a broken system, caught in the crossfire of something much bigger than his personal actions. Meanwhile, Malik's mother remained a constant pillar of strength. She had always been there for him, but now, more than ever, she stood beside him as he faced this uphill battle. She had known from the moment she heard what had happened that her son was no criminal, and seeing him free from the station only reinforced her determination to keep fighting for justice. As the days went on, Malik realized that his fight for justice wasn't just about proving his own innocence. It was about challenging the system that allowed this to happen to him, to countless others, and to communities like his, who had been unfairly targeted for far too long. The battle ahead would be difficult, but Malik wasn't afraid. He had the support of his community, the media behind him, and a personal drive to see this fight through. He understood now more than ever that real change required more than just one victory. It required a movement, and Malik was ready to lead it. Malik's victory in court marked a pivotal moment, not just for him, but for the countless others who had experienced similar injustices. His fight had become a symbol of hope, a beacon that showed that even in the face of an unjust system, one person could make a difference. The case reverberated beyond Harlem, stirring conversations across the country about the urgent need for reform. Though the legal battle had been won, Malik knew the road ahead was long. The reforms within the police department were only the beginning, and Malik's work was far from over. His name had become synonymous with justice, but he was humble about the attention, always redirecting the spotlight to the people who had stood by him. His community, his family, and the people who had believed in him even when the odds seemed insurmountable. The months after the trial were filled with both triumph and tension. Malik spent his days advocating for the underrepresented, taking on cases that no one else would touch, ensuring that the fight for justice never slowed. But he also made sure to listen, to learn, and to grow. He knew that the work was far from finished, but every small victory, every life touched, every story told, was a step in the right direction. The movement that had been sparked by his arrest continued to grow. Protests, town hall meetings, and rallies took place across the country. People stood together, united by the belief that they deserved better, that the cycle of injustice needed to be broken. Malik was proud to see others rise up, knowing that his story had helped ignite a flame of change. But he also knew that this fight would require persistence, patience, and an unwavering commitment to fairness. As he continued his work, Malik never lost sight of where he came from. He regularly visited the neighborhoods that shaped him, and he made sure to connect with the young people who were now looking up to him as a role model. Harlem, a place that had always been full of life and energy, was a constant reminder of what he was fighting for. A world where everyone had the opportunity to thrive, regardless of race, background, or circumstance. His legacy grew, not just as a civil rights attorney, but as a symbol of resilience. Malik's work reached beyond the courtroom as he became a sought-after speaker, sharing his story and encouraging others to stand up against injustice. In the years to come, his impact would only continue to spread, leaving an indelible mark on the fight for racial equality and justice. But for Malik, the true measure of his success wasn't in the headlines or the accolades. It was in the quiet moments when he saw change happening on the ground, in the faces of people who had found their voice, in the community that had come together, and in the hearts of those who now dared to believe that justice, while hard fought, was still possible. As long as there was breath in his lungs, Malik was ready to keep fighting, for himself, for those who couldn't fight for themselves, and for the future where justice and equality prevailed for all. Malik agreed to meet Ramirez, though he couldn't shake the wariness that lingered in his chest. His experiences with the police had taught him to question everything, especially when it came to officers who might have an agenda of their own. But something about her tone, genuine, almost vulnerable, had piqued his interest. It was a risk, but Malik had learned that understanding all sides of a story was necessary for real change. They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe not far from his office, a neutral space where he could keep his guard up. When Malik arrived, He saw Ramirez already seated at a corner table. She was dressed casually, her posture open, but there was a visible tension in her shoulders as she waited. He took a deep breath and walked over, taking a seat across from her. "Malik," she began, her eyes meeting his with a seriousness that instantly caught his attention. "I want you to know that I never agreed with what happened to you. I've seen the systemic issues in this department, but I didn't have the courage to speak out until now. I'm hoping you'll listen." Malik didn't respond right away. He studied her, wondering if this was another tactic, another attempt to save face. But he had learned that sometimes listening was more important than reacting. So he let her continue. "I've been in this department for over 15 years, Ramirez continued, and I've seen the corruption, the favoritism, and the way the system protects officers who shouldn't be on the force, Kirkland and Mendoza. They're just a small part of a much larger problem." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I was part of that system too, but I can't stay silent anymore." Malik listened, his mind processing her words. He had always known there were officers who didn't stand for the status quo, but hearing it from someone inside, someone with her experience, was a revelation. Still, he had to be cautious. "What are you asking me?" Malik's voice was low, testing her sincerity. "I want to help you," she said, "not just with the lawsuit, but with the larger fight for police reform. I have information, internal reports, data that could help expose just how deep the corruption goes. But I can't do this alone. I need your help to make sure it reaches the right people." Malik's heart raced. This was the kind of ally he had been waiting for. Someone who understood the system from the inside. Someone who had seen it all, but was now willing to fight for change. But it came with risks. If word got out that Ramirez was speaking against the department, she would be targeted. Her career, her life, could be in jeopardy. "I'll help," Malik said after a long pause. "But we need to do this carefully. We can't let them know we're coming." Ramirez nodded, her relief palpable. "I know the risks, but I believe in this. I believe we can fix this if we work together." They spent the next hour discussing the details, what she had seen, the evidence she could provide, and the ways they could approach the movement without drawing too much attention too soon. As they parted ways, Malik couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a powerful ally. But the road ahead was still unclear, and the fight would only grow tougher. And he walked back through the city. Malik felt a renewed sense of purpose. The weight of the battle was heavy, but for the first time in a long while, he felt like he had real, tangible support. And as long as people like Ramirez were willing to step forward, Malik knew the fight for justice was far from over. It was just beginning. Clarenguian nodded, her fingers hovering over the keyboard as she absorbed the gravity of the documents in front of her. "I agree. If we release this all at once, they'll bury it. We need to break it down. Expose the layers slowly so it can't be ignored." She leaned back, thoughtful. "I'll start reaching out to other reporters, get the media involved in a way that gives us the upper hand." Malik couldn't afford to be reckless. He had seen how quickly a story could be twisted or silenced by powerful forces. But this wasn't just about his fight anymore. This was bigger. It was about exposing the deep-rooted issues that had poisoned the system for years. He could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on him. But it only fueled his determination. They worked through the night, carefully planning their strategy. Each move had to be precise, calculated. The media, public opinion, and the legal system. Malik needed all of them on his side. He didn't have the luxury of making mistakes. Over the next week, they released a trickle of the information, piecing it out to maximize impact. Clara wrote a series of explosive articles, each one revealing more about the officers' sabotage of the reform efforts. The articles hit hard, documented, proof that the corruption ran deeper than anyone had imagined. Public outrage flared, and as word spread, the pressure on the police department grew exponentially. Malik knew the department was reeling, but he also knew they would fight back, hard. Soon Malik began hearing rumors. Officers had started getting nervous. Whispers of an internal purge were spreading, as more and more people in the department feared exposure. Malik's victory over Kirkland and Mendoza had opened a door to the truth, and now it seemed like the whole system was starting to unravel. Ramirez had been in touch regularly, providing additional insights and tips from within. Each conversation made it clear that the police leadership was trying to save face by pretending to be unaware of the corruption at the lower levels. But Malik wasn't fooled. He knew they were complicit. One afternoon, as Malik walked through Harlem, his phone rang. It was Ramirez. "I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this," she said, her voice tight with anxiety. "They're getting suspicious. I think they're onto me." Malik felt his stomach drop. "You need to get out of there. Go underground if you have to. Your safety comes first." "No," she said quickly. "I'm fine for now. But you need to prepare. Things are escalating. You can't rely on me for much longer. You'll have to take this to the next level on your own." Malik's mind raced. This was it. He had known the risks, but hearing them laid out so plainly made it real. He had no choice but to go all in. He couldn't back down. Too many lives were at stake. With the documents, the media attention, and the community support behind him, Malik prepared for the most critical phase of his fight. The lawsuit against the department was just one front. He was about to take on a much bigger battle. He would push for real, systemic change, and he wasn't going to stop until the truth was fully exposed. Back at his office, he reviewed the final documents Ramirez had provided. It was time to make the next move, to confront the powers that be head-on. With his legal team ready, the journalists primed, and the momentum building, Malik felt a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. He was fighting for the future. And he wasn't alone. "We'll figure it out." "We have to," Malik said, his voice low but resolute. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, but he couldn't afford to show fear. Not now, not when. They were so close. Ramirez's eyes met his, filled with uncertainty, but also a glimmer of trust. "I never thought it would get this bad," she whispered. "I just wanted to make a difference. Now it feels like we're all trapped." Malik nodded, his mind racing through their options. He couldn't let her down, and he couldn't let the movement lose momentum. The people were behind them. The community was awake. But the clock was ticking, and the stakes were higher than ever. "You did the right thing by coming forward. Now we need to make sure it wasn't in vain," Malik said firmly. "We'll get you out of here, get you somewhere safe, but we can't stop. Not now." Ramirez's lips quivered, and for a brief moment, Malik saw the exhaustion and fear that had been hidden behind her tough exterior. She had been fighting this system for so long, and now she was being dragged into the very storm she had hoped to change. "Just be careful, Malik," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The people who want to protect this system, they're ruthless." He nodded again, his resolve hardening. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. As Malik left the motel, his phone buzzed. It was Emma again, her message urgent. "Malik, you need to get to the city council meeting tomorrow. The police unions are pushing back harder than we thought. They're about to launch a smear campaign against you." Malik's heart sank. He had known this fight would get ugly, but the speed at which the opposition was escalating took him by surprise. They were going to do everything in their power to ruin him, to undermine everything they had built. He glanced back at the motel, then to the street around him, his every step weighed down by the sense that danger was closing in. He couldn't lose this fight. The people had come together, had put their trust in him, and he couldn't let fear or threats tear them apart. The next day, Malik and his team arrived at the city council meeting, the tension palpable. The halls were packed with reporters, activists, and city officials. The media presence was intense, the spotlight blinding. Malik's eyes scanned the room, looking for Emma, his legal team, anyone who could give him an edge. As he took his seat, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something that could change everything. And as he looked at the faces around him, he knew that despite the odds, he had no choice but to keep pushing forward. He was fighting for more than just justice for himself, or even for Ramirez. He was fighting for the people who had been silenced for too long, for the voices that had been ignored, for the communities that had been oppressed. This was the turning point, the chance to change history. He wasn't backing down now. Changes. This is not just about me or the cases we've fought. It's about every person who has been hurt by this system. It's about the communities that have been ignored, the voices that have been silenced. We are standing here today because we refuse to let it go on any longer. He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd, letting the gravity of his words settle in. We are here because we know that true justice isn't a dream. It's something we build together. It's something we fight for every single day. But the work isn't done. This board, this movement, it's just the beginning. We have a long road ahead, but every step we take is one closer to a future where everyone, no matter the color of their skin, can trust that the system will treat them with the dignity and respect they deserve. Malik's voice wavered with emotion, but he steadied himself. The crowd was silent, listening intently, every person feeling the weight of his words. We've seen progress, we've seen change, but we cannot forget that the work is ongoing. We must continue to push for accountability, transparency, and fairness at every level. We must ensure that no one is ever made to feel invisible again. Not here, not anywhere. The room erupted in applause, but Malik didn't smile. He simply nodded, knowing that this wasn't the end of the fight. It was just another battle won in a much larger war. As he stepped down from the podium, Emma was waiting for him, her eyes filled with pride. "You did it," she said, her voice quiet but strong. "We did it," Malik corrected her, his face serious but satisfied. "This isn't just my victory. This is ours, and it's only the beginning." He turned to face the crowd once more. The people who had stood by him, the people who had demanded justice. And with the Civilian Review Board up and running, the next chapter had begun. The work was far from over, but Malik had proven that change was possible, and as long as he had breath in his body, he would keep fighting for it. Malik reached across the table, placing a hand on hers, offering silent reassurance. "You did what was right, and that's something no one can ever take from you. This fight, this movement, it needs people like you. People who are willing to stand up no matter the cost." Ramirez looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also a flicker of hope. "I just hope it's enough. I hope it leads to something bigger than just us." "It already has," Malik replied softly. "Look at how far we've come. This isn't just about the people in this room. It's about everyone who's been impacted. And we're changing things, one step at a time." They sat in silence for a while, the weight of their conversations settling between them. Malik knew that the journey was far from over, but there was a sense of resolve in the air. Despite the opposition, despite the personal toll it was taking on people like Ramirez, they were making progress. The fight for justice, equality, and dignity for all was a long road, and not everyone would be on board. But Malik knew that the more they pushed, the more the truth would resonate, and eventually, the momentum would be too strong to stop. After a few moments, Malik stood up, offering a reassuring smile. "You're not alone in this. We're in this together." Ramirez gave a small nod, her expression less burdened than before. "Thank you, Malik, for everything." With that, Malik stepped back into the world, knowing that the battle was ongoing. There would be more threats, more resistance, more challenges, but he was ready. The fight for justice didn't end with the creation of the Civilian Review Board. It was just the beginning. And he wasn't stopping until every person was treated with the respect and dignity they deserved. And there were still battles to be fought, many of them deeply entrenched. Malik often reflected on how far they had come, yet he knew that for real, lasting change, the work had to be persistent and unwavering. The fight for equality, for justice, was never truly over. There would always be more challenges, more hurdles to overcome. He found strength in the work itself, in the stories of people who had found their voice, in the communities that were standing up, speaking out, and demanding better. Each victory, no matter how small, was a step closer to the future they all deserved. One evening, after a long day of meetings and discussions, Malik stood in front of a mirror, looking at the tired but determined reflections staring back at him. He knew the weight of his role. It wasn't just about the reforms, the policies, or the headlines. It was about people, real people, fighting for a better life, for dignity, for respect. He wasn't just a lawyer anymore. He was a movement, a leader, and a symbol of what could be achieved when people dared to dream of a better world. As he looked out the window, watching the city's lights flicker beneath him, Malik smiled. There were still many roads ahead. There were still those who fought against change, who clung to the old ways. But they were no longer silent. They had been given a voice, and they were using it. Malik had never set out to be a symbol. He had just wanted to do what was right. But as he continued his work, he realized that sometimes that's all it takes. To be the catalyst, to be the spark that ignites something bigger than yourself. And though he knew the fight would never truly be over, Malik was ready for whatever came next. Because he knew that real change started with people like him. People willing to speak up, to act, and to never back down. And as long as there were others by his side, he knew they would keep fighting until the world reflected the values of justice, equality, and dignity for all. Malik stood in the quiet of the evening, the weight of everything he had fought for settling into his bones. The journey had been grueling, filled with moments of doubt and loss. But as he looked at the statue, his statue, a symbol of resilience and hope, he realized how far they had come. He had never done it alone. There had been his mother, his community, Emma, Ramirez, the activists, and so many others who had believed in the same cause. Together, they had dismantled systems of injustice piece by piece, creating something stronger in its place. The city had changed, but so had Malik. He no longer saw himself just as the man who had led the fight for police accountability. He was part of something bigger, a movement that spanned far beyond any one city, any one case. And while there would always be battles ahead, he knew that the foundation they had built was unshakable. As he stood there, surrounded by the people who had stood by him, Malik's heart swelled with pride. They had done it, not just because of his efforts, but because of the collective strength of a community that refused to stay silent, a city that had finally risen up to demand better. The statue in front of him was not just a reminder of past victories, but a promise to future generations that the fight for justice and equality was worth every sacrifice. "We did it," Malik whispered again, his voice filled with quiet conviction. "Yes, we did," his mother replied, squeezing his hand. The pride in her voice was a reflection of everything they had overcome, of all the hard work and perseverance it had taken. She had always believed in him, and now she had seen the truth of her belief. Malik turned to face the future, ready for whatever came next. The world was different now, but the fight wasn't over. True justice, as he had come to learn, was a journey, a long, winding road, and as long as he could walk it, he would keep fighting. For change, for hope, for a better tomorrow. The city sparkled beneath him, a living testament to the work they had all done. And as the sun set behind them, Malik felt a quiet satisfaction. They had built something that would endure, a legacy of change that would echo through generations to come. This was just the beginning.